Hello, dear friend. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Sleepy Hub, where you'll find sleepy history, sleepy facts, sleepy learning, and sleepy spotlights. But before we begin, if you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Please also consider writing a positive message in the comments to all your other sleepy friends here. The day has folded itself away, and now the air feels softer, slower, filled with quiet possibility. Let yourself drift here for a while. There's no rush, no plan. Only this small, peaceful space between waking and dreaming. Take a deep breath in through your nose and slowly exhale through your mouth. Again, breathe in ease and breathe out the day. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands grow heavy where they rest. There's nowhere to go, nothing to prove, nothing to fix. Just this moment. A moment made only for you. Now imagine that the night around you is a vast canvas, deep blue and soft as velvet. The stars above are tiny brushstrokes of silver, scattered by an invisible hand. Somewhere far away, a candle flickers, its golden flame bending like a dancer in the dark. And beside that candle sits a man with gentle eyes and paint-stained hands, a dreamer, lost in thought. His name is Leonardo da Vinci. He was born in a small village in Italy over 500 years ago. Yet his curiosity feels as alive today as it did then. He looked at the world not just with his eyes, but with his heart, seeing beauty in the flight of birds, the shape of water, the curve of a smile. To him, imagination was not separate from reality. It was the very essence of it, the bridge between what is and what could be. Tonight, we will journey softly through Leonardo's world, not to study, but to feel, to walk with him through sunlit fields and candlelit studios, to listen to his thoughts as they flutter like wings through the quiet of the night. And as we do, perhaps you'll find that a part of you, the part that still wonders, still imagines, begins to stir too. Take another slow breath. Let your body grow heavier, your mind lighter. Let the stories of Leonardo's life drift through you like watercolor spreading across a page. Gentle, fluid, luminous. You are safe here. You are welcome here. The night itself is smiling, ready to show you that rest is also a kind of creation, and that every dream you have is a brushstroke on the canvas of your own becoming. Our story begins as all stories do, with a child who looked up and saw more than anyone else could see. Chapter 1: The Boy Who Watched the Sky. Long before Leonardo became the name we know, the artist, the inventor, the thinker, he was simply a boy surrounded by light and open air. He was born in the small village of Vinci, in the heart of Tuscany, where the hills rolled gently toward the horizon, and olive trees shimmered silver green in the sun. The days were long and golden, and the nights carried the hum of crickets and the distant sound of church bells. Leonardo's world was filled with beauty, not because it was grand, but because he noticed it. He saw how the sunlight moved through leaves, how water curled over stones, how clouds drifted like dreams across the blue. He would often wander alone through fields, sketchbook tucked under his arm, though in those early days his sketches were little more than the marks of wonder, lines that tried to capture the wind. He watched birds lift effortlessly into the air and wondered how they managed it. He watched ripples on the surface of ponds and wondered where they began. He watched people and animals and storms and stars, and everything he saw asked him to look again. There was a gentleness in Leonardo even as a child, a patience with the world that many people never find. He didn't rush to understand things. He let them reveal themselves slowly. To him, the world wasn't a puzzle to be solved. It was a mystery to be appreciated. Every question was a doorway, not a demand for an answer. Every shadow was an invitation to discover the light behind it. Sometimes, in the cool evenings, he would lie on his back in the grass and stare at the sky until it turned from gold to violet to deep indigo. The first stars would appear, faint at first, then bright enough to make him feel small, yet wonderfully connected to something vast. He would close his eyes and imagine himself floating upward among them, tracing invisible patterns between the constellations. It wasn't that he wanted to escape the world below. It was that he wanted to understand how the heavens and the earth spoke to each other. His family, like most in Vinci, lived simply. His father was a notary, a man of words and ink. And though Leonardo's birth was not one the world would have expected to make history, the people of his village already saw something special in him. They said he had a mind like a river, quiet on the surface, but always moving beneath. He would ask endless questions, not to challenge, but to learn. Why is the sky blue? How does a seed know to become a tree? Why does water sparkle when it moves? And when no one could answer, he didn't grow frustrated. He simply smiled, as if the mystery itself was enough. When storms rolled across the valley, Leonardo would run to the windows to watch the rain. He noticed how it curved and danced in the wind, how thunder echoed between hills. He began to see that nature was a kind of teacher, patient, rhythmic, endlessly creative. From the pattern of feathers on a bird's wing to the spirals inside seashells, he saw that everything had design, purpose, harmony. And though he didn't yet have the words, he understood something very deep, that to observe was to love. At night, when the village grew quiet and the only light came from flickering candles, Leonardo would sit by the window with a piece of charcoal and a scrap of parchment. He drew what he remembered from the day: the arc of a bird's flight, the twist of a vine, the reflection of the moon in a puddle. His lines were soft, searching. He wasn't trying to copy the world, he was trying to listen to it. His drawings were a kind of conversation with nature, a dialogue made of lines and shadows. Sometimes he would pause and simply gaze at his hands, turning them in the candlelight. He saw the veins beneath the skin, the way the fingers folded and curved, and he felt awe at their design. He didn't yet know that one day he would dissect the human body to understand its secrets, or that his notebooks would be filled with studies of muscles and bones. For now, he simply felt gratitude for the miracle of movement, that he could draw, build, and touch the world around him. As he grew older, Leonardo's imagination grew wilder. He began to invent small things, simple toys, curious tools, bits of wood and string that moved in surprising ways. The other children laughed sometimes, not out of cruelty, but because they couldn't quite see what he saw. Leonardo didn't mind. He knew that the imagination is like a bird. It can't be caged, and it flies differently for everyone. Those early years in Vinci planted something in him that would never fade, a sense of wonder that followed him all his life. He would go on to paint masterpieces and design machines that the world wouldn't understand for centuries. But at his core, he always remained that boy lying in the grass, watching the sky, whispering questions into the wind. And so, the story of Leonardo da Vinci begins, not in the grand halls of Florence or beneath the vaulted ceilings of castles, but here, in the quiet of the countryside, where curiosity was born and the stars first spoke his name. Chapter 2: The Quiet Apprentice. When Leonardo was still a young man, not yet 20, he left behind the soft hills of Vinci and walked the winding roads to Florence, a city alive with creation. The air there seemed to shimmer with possibility. Painters, sculptors, and architects filled the streets. Church bells echoed between marble buildings. Apprentices carried jars of paint, rolls of parchment, and chisels across courtyards bathed in light. It was the Renaissance, a time when art, science, and faith danced together. And Leonardo, quiet but wide-eyed, stepped right into the heart of it. He became an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the most respected artists in Florence. Verrocchio's studio was more than a place of painting. It was a world of sound, scent, and rhythm. There was the scratch of charcoal on wood, the metallic tang of gold leaf, the perfume of linseed oil and drying plaster. Young men bent over easels, mixing pigments made from crushed minerals, and carved blocks of marble until dust turned their hair white. In one corner, apprentices ground paint by hand. In another, they studied the way light fell on fabric or faces. Leonardo said little, but his silence was not shyness. It was attention. He absorbed everything: how colors changed with the hours, how shadows could make a flat surface come alive, how patience turned practice into beauty. He watched his teacher mix paint until it gleamed like wet stone, then apply it to canvas with strokes so delicate they seemed to breathe. Leonardo noticed the way Verrocchio paused often, standing back to look, as if listening to what the painting wanted to say. In those early days, Leonardo learned that art was not just about the eye, but about the heart. A good artist, Verrocchio told him, must love the subject before the brush even touches it. And Leonardo did. He loved everything: the lines of a hand, the tilt of a bird's wing, the color of morning fog. His curiosity moved from one thing to another, like sunlight over water, never still for long. The older apprentices sometimes teased him for his questions. "Why must you stare so long at the shadows?" one asked. Leonardo smiled. "Because," he said softly, "they hold the light's secrets." It was a simple answer, but it showed who he was. A boy who saw what others missed. When others drew what they saw, Leonardo drew what he felt. He noticed the small tremors of movement that made a figure look alive. A blink, a breath, a soft curve of thought. One afternoon, Verrocchio gave Leonardo the task of painting an angel in a large canvas of Christ's baptism. The master trusted him, but no one expected what would happen next. When the painting was finished, Verrocchio stood before it in silence. The angel Leonardo had painted was so graceful, so luminous, that it seemed almost to move. The folds of fabric glowed as though sunlight had been woven into them. The other apprentices murmured in awe. Legend says that Verrocchio, humbled and proud all at once, put down his brush and said he would never paint again. Whether that story is true or not, it carries a truth of its own. That in that moment, Leonardo's light began to shine. But Leonardo himself didn't seek praise. He was too curious for pride. After the angel was complete, he didn't boast. He went outside to study how water rippled where sunlight touched it. For him, art wasn't an achievement, it was a question. Each painting was a chance to learn something new, and each question led to 10 more. He filled his notebooks with sketches, the curve of a smile, the way hair fell across a shoulder, the patterns of waves and wind. Even his mistakes delighted him. Obstacles, he would one day write, cannot crush me. Every obstacle yields to resolve. In the studio, he worked long after others had gone home, leaning close to the candlelight, drawing until the wax burned low. When sleep came, it often came sitting up, his hand still smudged with charcoal, his mind still painting in dreams. Outside, the streets of Florence glowed with life. Artists debated in taverns, musicians played in squares, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from open windows. But Leonardo's joy wasn't in the noise of the city. It was in its quiet corners. The reflection of the moon in the Arno River, the hush of the studio after dark, the slow dance of a shadow across a stone wall. Those were his teachers as much as any master. His apprenticeship taught him technique, but even more, it taught him devotion, the sacred art of paying attention. In learning to paint what he saw, he learned to love what he observed. And in learning to love, he learned to see more deeply than ever before. The boy from Vinci had become an artist, but more than that, he had become a listener to light, to color, to the heartbeat of the world itself. And as he walked home one evening beneath the glow of lanterns swinging in the Florentine wind, he looked up at the night sky, the same sky he had watched as a child, and whispered a quiet promise to himself that he would never stop wondering. Chapter 3. The Painter of Breath. There are painters who capture what they see, and there are painters who capture what they feel. But Leonardo da Vinci did something even rarer. He painted what lives between seeing and feeling, between what is and what might be. His art wasn't simply about faces or objects. It was about the air that moves around them, the invisible breath that connects everything. To him, painting was not a copy of the world. It was a mirror for its soul. In Florence, and later in Milan, Leonardo began to work on portraits that felt unlike anything anyone had ever seen. He studied light as though it were a living thing, how it touched skin, how it curved over fabric, how it softened edges until they disappeared like mist. In his hands, shadow became not absence, but presence. He called this soft blending sfumato, meaning to vanish like smoke. When you look at his paintings, it's as though they are exhaling. Quiet, calm, endlessly alive. One of his earliest portraits, The Lady with an Ermine, shows a young woman turning her head slightly to the side. Her eyes are bright but thoughtful, her hand resting on a small white animal that seems ready to leap away, yet neither truly moves, and still they breathe. Leonardo had discovered a kind of magic. That motion can exist in stillness. Every line in her hand, every glimmer in her eye, tells a story, not of what she does, but of who she is. He became obsessed with faces, not for vanity or beauty, but for truth. In marketplaces, in churches, on quiet streets, he would pause to watch people talk or laugh, memorizing the tiny muscles that shaped emotion. Later, in his notebooks, he would draw those same faces. The raised eyebrow, the softened mouth, the eyes that smiled before the lips did. To Leonardo, the human face was the most mysterious landscape of all. The eyes, he wrote, are the windows of the soul. And then, of course, there was La Gioconda, the painting the world would come to call the Mona Lisa. No one knows exactly who she was, and perhaps that is part of her spell. What we do know is that Leonardo painted her slowly, over years, layering thin veils of color until her smile seemed to hover between happiness and knowing. Her eyes seemed to follow you, but gently, like someone who loves you from across a room. He gave her not just a face, but breath, the whisper of life caught forever in silence. When people saw the Mona Lisa, they couldn't explain what made her different. The background looked like a dream: mountains, rivers, a winding road fading into mist. The woman seemed both near and far, real and unreal, part of the earth and part of the sky. It was as if Leonardo had taken the feeling of dusk, that fleeting moment between day and night, and turned it into a person. The painting didn't simply show her, it invited the viewer to feel her. But Leonardo's genius wasn't just in his skill, it was in his patience. He worked slowly, often spending hours on a single detail: the glint in an eye, the curve of a fingertip, the shimmer of fabric. He waited for light to change, for color to settle, for inspiration to arrive. To some, it seemed he took too long. To him, it was sacred time. Art, he once said, is never finished, only abandoned. He understood that perfection was not about completion, it was about devotion. In his studio, the air was thick with the scent of oil and pigment. Light poured through small windows, shifting as the sun moved across the sky. Sometimes he would stop painting and simply watch how a ray of light illuminated the dust in the air, tiny flecks floating in slow, graceful spirals. He saw beauty in that too, how even dust could glow when touched by light. He began to paint not only people, but the feeling of existence itself, the way wind moves through trees, how distance turns blue, how the edges of everything blur when seen through tears or fog. His art whispered, "Look closer. Everything is alive." Even when Leonardo painted great religious scenes, his focus was always human tenderness, the curve of a child's hand, the gentle tilt of a mother's head. His Virgin of the Rocks feels more like a dream than a painting, full of soft light and flowing shapes. The figures seem to emerge from the landscape like thoughts from the mind of nature itself. To watch Leonardo paint was to see meditation made visible. He didn't rush, he breathed. He would step back, tilt his head, squint, and smile softly as though the painting had just spoken to him. His assistants said that sometimes he would paint only a few strokes before falling silent for hours, not out of frustration, but because he was listening. He once said, "Painting is poetry that is seen rather than felt." And perhaps that is why, even 500 years later, his paintings still speak so gently. For Leonardo, art was not about being remembered. It was about noticing what others forgot. The light behind the light, the breath beneath the breath. And though time has carried his works across centuries, the feeling they give remains the same: stillness, wonder, and the quiet miracle of being alive. When night fell over his studio and the last candle flickered low, Leonardo would put down his brush and step outside. The air would be cool, filled with the scent of rain and stone. He would look up at the same sky he'd watched as a child, endless, full of stars, and think how light, whether from the sun or from the soul, was the greatest gift of all. Chapter 4. The Engineer of Dreams. When Leonardo wasn't painting, his mind was still at work, sketching invisible machines in the air, turning clouds into gears and rivers into lines of motion. His notebooks, hundreds of pages of them, were filled with drawings that seemed to come from another world. Flying machines, bridges, water wheels, musical instruments, and even designs for robots, long before anyone had ever imagined such a thing. But to Leonardo, these weren't fantasies. They were simply possibilities waiting for their moment. He believed that anything imagined could one day be made real. By candlelight, he would lean over his pages, his quill scratching softly as he drew. He wrote in tiny, careful script, often in mirror writing, right to left, as if his ideas were secrets meant only for dreamers to read. The ink would dry slowly, the parchment curling at the edges, and sometimes he'd rest his hand in the margin, as though steadying himself against the weight of his own imagination. The drawings were elegant, not rigid or mechanical, but alive, like the thoughts of a living world translated through his fingertips. In his mind, every invention was connected to nature. He didn't invent from the world, he invented with it. He studied how birds tilted their wings in flight and how fish cut through water. He watched how seeds spiraled as they fell, how the wind turned leaves into dancers. He saw the entire earth as a grand design, full of clues about movement, balance, and beauty. And so, his machines, his flying gliders, his diving suits, his self-propelled carts, all carried a touch of nature's grace. He drew an early version of a helicopter, a large spiral made of linen and reed that he called the aerial screw. He believed that if turned fast enough, it could lift into the air. Others might have seen folly in such a dream, but Leonardo saw truth hidden in curiosity. The world had not yet caught up to his vision, but he knew it would, someday. Once you have tasted flight, he wrote, you will walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward. His notebooks were more than blueprints. They were diaries of wonder. On one page, he might draw a machine to move water uphill. On the next, a design for a musical instrument that played with the power of wind. He filled margins with reflections on the soul, on love, on the movement of stars. It was as if every thought he ever had deserved a place, and so it did. He was building not just inventions, but a map of imagination itself. In the courts of Milan, Leonardo's genius was admired by dukes and scholars. They asked him to design fortresses, canals, and theatres. Yet even surrounded by prestige, his joy was in the process, in watching an idea unfold from the invisible to the visible. He would stand by the edge of rivers, sketching how water bent around stones, whispering to himself as if in conversation with it. "You teach me," he might have murmured. "You show me how things move." He was fascinated by flight more than anything. Birds were his teachers, their wings like poems of physics and grace. He collected feathers, studied their patterns, and drew diagrams of their motion. In his mind, flight was not only a dream of the body, but of the soul. Proof that humans could reach for the heavens, not through power, but through understanding. To watch a bird soar was, to him, to witness harmony between desire and design. There were times when people laughed at his strange inventions: wooden wings, mechanical knights, vast bridges that could fold and move. Yet Leonardo never felt discouraged. He believed that imagination was its own kind of truth, even if the world wasn't ready to see it. Every failed experiment was still a success to him, because it meant he had learned something new. In his journals he wrote, "I have been impressed with the urgency of doing. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Being willing is not enough. We must do." And yet, Leonardo's doing was gentle. It was play. He moved through the world with a child's curiosity and a philosopher's calm. He saw no line between art and science, between fantasy and structure. To him, a sketch of a flying machine was as beautiful as a painting of an angel, because both express the same truth, that creativity is divine. Sometimes when he grew tired, Leonardo would step away from his work and gaze at the stars. The same stars that had once inspired him as a boy in Vinci still guided him. He'd smile softly as if to say thank you for the endlessness, for the mystery, for the chance to imagine. The world, after all, was his teacher and his canvas. And in that balance of study and dream, of line and light, he found peace. Many of his inventions would never be built in his lifetime, and yet, centuries later, the world would discover that his designs worked perfectly, precisely, beautifully. The machines of the future would look strikingly like the ones Leonardo once drew by candlelight. His dream had simply been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And so, as the night deepened around him and the ink dried on his pages, Leonardo da Vinci, the artist, the inventor, the dreamer, closed his eyes, not knowing that the world itself was turning into his sketchbook. Chapter 5. The Anatomy of Wonder. There was a time when Leonardo's curiosity turned inward, toward the body itself, the moving masterpiece that carried the soul. Most people feared to look too closely at such things, believing the body to be too mysterious, too private to study. But to Leonardo, every structure of nature, including the human form, was divine. He believed the body was art in motion, a landscape of lines, rhythms, and patterns designed by something greater than any one person could understand. To know it was to know life itself. Late at night, under the soft light of a flickering candle, he would open his notebooks and sketch the curve of a hand, the turn of a wrist, the lift of a shoulder. His drawings were not cold or detached. They were alive with tenderness. The muscles looked as though they might stretch at any moment. The skin seemed to breathe. He studied not just what things looked like, but how they worked, how tendons pulled, how joints rotated, how breath expanded the chest. He wanted to understand the mystery that made us move, feel, and dream. In those quiet hours, he saw the human body as a universe of its own. He compared veins to rivers, the heart to a furnace of light, the brain to a labyrinth of stars. To him, the body was not a collection of parts, it was a symphony. Each element played its note perfectly, forming harmony out of motion. He often wrote in his journals, "The human foot is a masterpiece of engineering and a work of art." Every piece, from the smallest bone to the largest muscle, carried the same brilliance that he saw in the flight of birds or the curve of a leaf. He marveled at how nature repeated its designs, how the branching of veins resembled trees, how the spirals and shells echoed in the curls of hair, how water flowed like blood and clouds drifted like thoughts. The connection between all things felt undeniable to him. Everything, he would later write, connects to everything else. That belief became his compass. In studying the body, he wasn't just studying anatomy, he was studying creation itself. To observe was, for Leonardo, an act of love. He treated the human body with the same reverence others might offer a cathedral. He believed it was sacred, not for its perfection, but for its complexity. The way a smile curved, the way fingers intertwined, the way breath entered and left, all of it was miraculous. He began to see that every person was a living sculpture, every heartbeat a kind of art. His sketches from this time are some of his most extraordinary. The Vitruvian Man, a figure standing inside a circle and a square, was not meant as mere geometry. It was Leonardo's way of showing that the human being is both part of the earth and part of the cosmos, perfectly balanced between matter and mystery. The circle represented the divine, the infinite, the square, the physical, the grounded. Together, they showed that we are both dreamers and dwellers, feet on the soil, minds in the stars. He wrote that a painter must understand anatomy not to dissect it, but to honor it, to know how the inner life creates the outer beauty. His notebooks describe not only bones and muscles, but emotions. He studied how a body changes with joy or sorrow, how posture carries feeling before words ever can. When he painted, he brought all of this knowledge to the surface, every brushstroke pulsed with understanding. Even centuries later, looking at his drawings, one can almost feel the breath behind them. They are quiet, gentle reminders that the miracle of life is not distant. It is right here, in the movement of our hands, the rhythm of our lungs, the beating of our hearts. Leonardo once said, "Nature never breaks her own laws." To him, this meant that we are not separate from nature. We are nature. Every inhale and exhale is the earth breathing through us. In the solitude of his study, surrounded by parchment and candlelight, Leonardo must have felt awe. That tingling recognition that to be human is to belong to something vast and intelligent. His drawings of the body were prayers disguised as studies, love letters to the mystery of life. And though science would one day evolve from his work, it would never surpass the tenderness that guided it. As the candle burned low and the pages filled with graceful lines, Leonardo would sit back and close his eyes. He didn't just see the body anymore. He felt it. He understood that wonder itself is a kind of anatomy, that curiosity pumps through the veins of every dreamer, and reverence is the heartbeat of discovery. And in that quiet realization, he found what he had been searching for all along, that the same creative force that built the stars also lives within us, drawing and breathing and dreaming still. Chapter 6, Between Science and Soul. Leonardo da Vinci lived in a world that loved to divide things, sacred and earthly, reason and faith, science and art. But Leonardo never believed in dividing anything that was meant to belong together. To him, truth was a circle. Every question connected to another, every mystery led to wonder, and everything, from the smallest raindrop to the farthest star, was part of the same infinite design. He once wrote, "Study the science of art. Study the art of science. Develop your senses, especially learn how to see." For Leonardo, seeing was not just with the eyes, but with the spirit. He approached the world like a poet with instruments instead of verses. When he painted, he was studying physics. When he dissected a flower, he was writing a poem. His brushstrokes were equations of emotion, his diagrams songs of structure. He lived as if the universe itself was an artist, and every act of creation, whether a heartbeat or a sunset, was its masterpiece. In his notebooks, you can find a drawing of a swirling vortex beside a paragraph about love, or a sketch of a flying machine beside a reflection on the soul. He didn't see contradictions there. To him, those things belong together. The motion of water was as spiritual as a prayer. The anatomy of the heart was as beautiful as the design of a cathedral. He believed that to study creation was to praise the Creator, and that curiosity itself was a sacred act. Many of his contemporaries could not understand this blending. Scholars saw him as too mystical for science. Theologians thought him too scientific for faith. But Leonardo smiled quietly at both. He didn't need sides. He needed balance. He wrote, "The painter has the universe in his mind and hands." He saw creation not as a hierarchy, but as a harmony, a single, breathing body of knowledge. In the mornings, when the light first entered his studio, he would often pause before beginning his work. The sunbeam that crossed his table fascinated him. He would watch how dust turned golden in its path, how the light bent and softened as it met the floor. He saw the laws of optics at play, but he also saw poetry, the way light seemed to move with tenderness, the way it revealed beauty and shadow at once. To Leonardo, that was life itself, the dance between clarity and mystery. He believed that logic without imagination was empty, and imagination without observation was lost. His greatest strength was that he never let one silence the other. He measured the length of wings, but he also dreamed of what it would feel like to fly. He built machines that worked, but also stories that whispered of freedom. He could see through the surface of the world and into its meaning, like someone who looked at a mirror and saw not his reflection, but the soul behind his eyes. Sometimes when he spoke with friends or students, he would say that science teaches how the heavens move, but art shows why. His voice was calm, steady, and full of affection. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He was sharing the peace he found in connection. He knew that every discovery, no matter how technical, was also emotional. When he solved a problem, it brought him the same joy as finishing a painting. Understanding was his form of prayer. He studied patterns, the spiral of water, the swirl of hair, the growth of plants, the movement of planets. He saw the same geometry repeated everywhere, as if the universe had written one perfect song and everything was a verse within it. "Simplicity," he wrote, "is the ultimate sophistication." To him, beauty wasn't complexity for its own sake. It was the balance between form and feeling. At night, when the world grew quiet, Leonardo would sit by an open window. The stars reminded him of mathematics, yes, but also of dreams. He saw no difference between the two. The universe to him was not a machine to be mastered. It was a story to be loved. He believed that if we could see with both the mind and the heart, we would find that science and soul are not opposites, but reflections. And so, Leonardo lived in that space between, a gentle bridge between logic and love. He didn't try to solve the mystery of life. He simply wanted to understand it more deeply. And in doing so, he became proof that reason and wonder can share the same breath. When he closed his notebooks for the night, the candlelight would flicker against the drawings of wings, hearts, and stars. He would smile to himself, that small, knowing smile of someone who understands that the world, in all its complexity, is one magnificent design. And as he drifted into sleep, his dreams must have looked like galaxies made of light and thought, endless, unified, and full of grace. Chapter 7. The Restless Mind. For all his genius, Leonardo's greatest gift was also his greatest challenge. His mind never stopped moving. It fluttered from one idea to the next, like a bird crossing open skies, following every glimmer of curiosity it saw. To those who watched him work, it seemed he could do anything, and yet, so much of what he began was left unfinished. Paintings remained half done, inventions incomplete, notebooks half filled and folded away. But for Leonardo, incompletion was not failure. It was simply part of the rhythm of discovery, the song of an imagination too wide to ever truly end. He would begin a painting with passion, layering color like a prayer. But before it was finished, a new question would pull him away. He might set down his brush and turn to study the way water twisted as it poured from a jug, or how smoke rose from a candle flame. His mind wandered not out of distraction, but devotion. The world was too beautiful, too intricate, too alive to focus on just one piece of it. Everything called to him: light, sound, anatomy, flight, memory, love, time. He wanted to hold all of it at once. In his notebooks, you can see the evidence of this restless joy. One page might show a design for a bridge. The next, a sketch of a cat stretching by a window. Then a list of questions, written like whispers of wonder. Why is the sky blue? What causes laughter? What makes the sound of thunder echo? He was not afraid to admit he didn't know. To Leonardo, not knowing was a kind of gift, the spark that kept curiosity alive. He once wrote, "Learning never exhausts the mind." And perhaps that was true for him. His curiosity gave him energy even when his body grew weary. He would rise early, chasing the sunrise across rooftops, then work until the last light faded, fueled not by ambition, but by awe. For Leonardo, creation wasn't a task to be completed. It was a way of living, a way of breathing. Every idea was an invitation to fall in love with the world again. Still, there were moments of quiet sadness too. Gentle, human moments. Sometimes, sitting alone among his sketches, he would sigh softly and wonder if he had done enough. There were so many dreams left half-drawn, so many ideas he would never see built. He once said, "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have." But perhaps that was not failure. Perhaps it was the mark of a true dreamer, one who always sees farther than he can reach. Leonardo's restlessness was not emptiness, it was abundance. His mind overflowed with life. To him, curiosity was not a burden, but a blessing, the heartbeat of creation itself. He understood something few ever do, that to live in wonder is its own kind of completion. Each unfinished drawing, each unanswered question, each moment of reflection was a thread in a much larger tapestry, one that would continue long after him. He lived in motion, but carried peace inside that motion. Even when projects slipped away or patrons grew impatient, Leonardo remained gentle. He would smile softly and say, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." There was humility in those words and also freedom. He knew that everything, art, thought, even life, is a work in progress, shaped by time, never truly complete. At night, his studio would be scattered with papers, half-drawn faces, gears, wings, and letters. He would walk among them slowly, like a gardener moving through a field of wildflowers. He would stop to pick one up, study it, and then place it back down. He saw beauty in the unfinished, poetry in imperfection. He believed that every idea was alive, even the ones left behind. "Iron rusts from disuse," he once wrote. "Water loses its purity from stagnation." And in the same way, inaction saps the vigor of the mind. So he kept creating, dreaming, exploring, not for glory, not for praise, but for love. The love of seeing, of wondering, of touching the world through thought. His mind might have been restless, but it was also tender. It carried the patience of someone who understood that life itself is a masterpiece still being painted. When sleep finally found him, it was never the heavy sleep of exhaustion, but the soft rest of someone who had spent the day in communion with wonder. The candle by his bed would flicker low, casting golden light over his scattered pages. And as his eyes closed, perhaps he dreamed of flying. Not because he longed to escape the world, but because he wanted to see it from every possible angle. Chapter 8. The Flight of Thought. For as long as Leonardo could remember, he had looked to the sky with wonder. Ever since he was a boy in Vinci watching birds glide across the hills, the dream of flight had followed him. But for Leonardo, flight was never just about rising into the air. It was about understanding the language of freedom. To fly, he believed, was to move in harmony with creation, to become part of the wind's secret dance. In his notebooks, the sketches of wings seem almost alive. He drew them with care, layered feathers, graceful curves, joints that mimicked the structure of bones. His designs looked less like machines and more like living things. He called them ornithopters, inspired by the Latin word for bird. Some were meant for humans to power with their arms and legs, others by levers and pulleys. All of them, in their own way, were poems, love letters to the sky. Leonardo didn't envy the birds. He studied them. He would spend hours watching how they tilted their wings, how they caught invisible currents, how they hovered in stillness and then suddenly soared. He saw that they didn't fight the air, they danced with it. When once you have tasted flight, he wrote, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward. He understood that the secret to flight wasn't force, but grace, the willingness to surrender to the wind. In one of his notes, he described how air could lift a bird the way water lifts a fish. He marveled at how both creatures lived in their own invisible oceans, one of air, one of sea, each obeying the same laws, each moved by the same unseen energy. To Leonardo, these patterns revealed something divine. Nature didn't separate things, it unified them. Every law was a line in the same symphony. He built small models of his flying machines, testing how they caught the air. Some failed, tumbling back to earth. Others glided for a moment, long enough to make his heart leap. When a design didn't work, he didn't grow frustrated. He simply smiled and tried again. Failure, to him, was a kind of flight too, a fall that taught you how to rise. He believed that imagination could only grow stronger through trial. Obstacles, he said, cannot crush me. Every obstacle yields to resolve. But the flight Leonardo dreamed of most was not of the body, it was of the mind. He saw thought itself as a kind of wing. Every question he asked lifted him higher, every discovery carried him farther. His ideas took flight across the pages of his notebooks, crossing centuries, defying gravity in their own quiet way. To imagine was to rise above limitation. He also saw flight as a lesson in balance between weight and lift, effort and surrender. He knew that flying was not about escaping the earth, but about understanding it. The same air that resisted the wings also held them aloft. In that paradox, Leonardo saw a truth about life. That resistance and support are often the same thing, seen from different angles. Sometimes, standing at the edge of a high tower or hill, Leonardo would stretch his arms wide and feel the wind push against him. He would close his eyes and listen to it, the rush and hum of invisible energy moving past his skin. In that moment, he wasn't testing his inventions or making notes. He was simply being, feeling what it might mean to let go. For Leonardo, the dream of flight was really the dream of possibility, the belief that the mind could go anywhere, that nothing was truly beyond reach. He wrote, "The human foot is a masterpiece of engineering, and so is the human mind." He knew that our greatest wings are not made of feathers or wood, but of curiosity and courage. Though his flying machines would never carry him into the air, his imagination did. And through that imagination, the rest of us eventually followed. Centuries later, when people did finally take to the skies, they carried a piece of his dream with them. Every airplane, every glider, every quiet child gazing up at clouds, all are echoes of Leonardo's vision. In the end, the flight he sought wasn't about conquering the air, but becoming part of it. He understood that imagination itself is flight, that to think, to create, to dream is to lift ourselves above the ordinary and into the infinite. As night fell over his studio and the candles flickered low, Leonardo would sometimes pause in his work, look out the window, and watch a single bird glide through the darkening sky. It would rise effortlessly on invisible currents, turning in wide circles before disappearing into the stars. And Leonardo, smiling softly, would whisper something only the wind could hear. We are meant to fly. Chapter 9. The Light Within the Shadow. Leonardo da Vinci once wrote that shadow was not the enemy of light, it was its partner. He believed that light had no meaning without darkness, that beauty was born where the two met and intertwined. To him, light was not just brightness, it was emotion, mystery, spirit. It revealed, but it also concealed. It was the language of the universe, and shadow was the ink that made it visible. In his studio, Leonardo studied light the way some people study scripture. He would sit for hours, watching the way it moved across walls, how it softened the edges of a vase or deepened the curve of a face. He noticed that even darkness had color, cool blues, tender grays, golden browns hidden within it. The painter, he said, must know how to place a dark beside a light so that each is made more beautiful by the other. It was a truth he found not only on canvas, but in everything. He learned that light does not simply strike an object, it wraps around it, embraces it, and gives it form. The way light and shadow touched each other was, to him, like the way love and sorrow coexisted in the heart, inseparable, necessary, endlessly transforming. When he painted, he didn't just illuminate faces, he illuminated feelings. His Mona Lisa smiles, not in bright sunlight, but in soft shadow, her expression alive because of the gentle balance between seen and unseen. Leonardo's fascination with light was also a study of patience. He waited for it, followed it, and let it lead him. He would say that light is the hand of time, painting the world differently every hour. Morning light is tender, forgiving. Noon is honest and revealing. Evening light is nostalgic, a quiet goodbye to the day. He loved the way dusk blurred boundaries, how it made everything equal. The sky and the earth, the color and the silence. Sometimes when he worked on large commissions, his patrons grew impatient. They wanted clear lines, brighter tones, more certainty. But Leonardo's world was one of transitions, the in-between spaces where truth lived. He painted air, emotion, and the mystery of what cannot be touched. When he was asked why he took so long, he smiled and said, "Details make perfection, and perfection is not a detail." He wasn't chasing perfection though. He was chasing peace. The peace that comes when opposites finally understand each other. In his notebooks, he wrote about the way light scatters in the atmosphere, the way shadows fall shorter in summer, longer in winter. He saw mathematics in the glow of fire, poetry in the dimness of candlelight. He knew that even the stars were simply shadows pierced by light. The universe, he believed, was painted in contrast, every brightness born from darkness, every darkness holding light within it. But Leonardo also found a personal truth in these studies. He saw that the same rule applied to the heart. Every joy holds a trace of sorrow. Every struggle hides the seed of grace. The light within us grows brighter because of what we've learned in the dark. He wrote, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a life well used brings happy death." To him, this wasn't morbid. It was peaceful. It meant that both day and night, both light and shadow, belonged to the same cycle. When he painted a hand, he would study how light curved around each knuckle, how a single shadow could tell the story of movement. When he drew faces, he let the darkness shape the feeling. He believed that without shadow there is no depth, without contrast there is no life. He saw the same law reflected everywhere, in nature, in music, in love, in loss. As Leonardo grew older, his fascination with light deepened into something spiritual. He began to write less about painting and more about illumination, the kind that comes from within. He believed that wisdom was a kind of inner light, one that grows brighter as we learn to accept our own shadows. He understood that to be human is to live between radiance and rest, to shine, to dim, to reflect, and to renew. And so, when the sun dipped below the horizon and his studio fell into darkness, Leonardo didn't rush to relight the candles. He would sit quietly for a while, letting his eyes adjust. The shapes around him slowly emerged again, faint, soft, full of mystery. He found comfort in that gentle fading, knowing that the dark was never empty, only resting. Outside, the stars would appear, small and steady, pinpricks of eternity. Leonardo would look up at them and smile, because he knew that even the night sky, vast and silent, was proof of his favorite truth, that there is always light within the shadow, and shadow within the light. Chapter 10. The Dream That Never Ends. In his later years, Leonardo da Vinci lived in a small home near the French countryside, surrounded by gardens, sketchbooks, and the quiet murmur of running water. The air there was gentler than the bustling cities he once knew. The noise of Florence and Milan had been replaced by the soft sounds of wind through trees, birdsong, and his own footsteps across stone floors. He was older now, his hair white, his movements slower, but his eyes, those clear, curious eyes, were as alive as ever. He spent his mornings walking by the river, watching how light played on the surface, how ripples carried reflections downstream. He still made sketches of flowers, faces, machines, though his hands trembled slightly. He no longer drew to build or impress. He drew to remember, to honor the world that had given him so much wonder. Every line was an act of gratitude. Visitors came from far and wide to see him. Young artists, scholars, dreamers. They called him Maestro and sought his wisdom. Yet when they asked how he had learned so much, Leonardo smiled softly and said, "I am still learning." It wasn't humility, it was truth. To him, curiosity was eternal. Even as his body aged, his spirit continued to bloom. He believed that the mind, like nature, was never finished, only transforming, only continuing its endless cycle of creation. He wrote reflections in his final notebooks, thoughts not of fame, but of life. "The noblest pleasure," he wrote, "is the joy of understanding." He had chased that joy his entire life, not because he needed answers, but because he loved the questions themselves. To him, every question was alive, a small bird of thought that could lift the soul higher. He had learned that imagination was not something to be outgrown. It was the most human thing we possess. Sometimes, he would sit by his window at dusk, watching the sky fade from gold to indigo. He noticed how each color gave way to the next, without rush, without effort, the perfect blending of endings and beginnings. In that soft light, he often looked at his old sketches, the wings that never flew, the machines that never built, and smiled. They were not failures. They were dreams that had simply changed form. He knew now that nothing is ever lost. Everything becomes part of the greater design. Leonardo passed away peacefully in 1519, with the sound of water nearby and the light of afternoon streaming through his window. But his dream, the dream of wonder, of unity, of curiosity, never ended. It lived on in every artist who painted softly, in every scientist who questioned kindly, in every dreamer who dared to imagine something new. He had once said, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a life well used brings happy death." And in that spirit, he rested, not in finality, but in continuation. The dream simply changed hands. 500 years later, his spirit still hums quietly in the world. In every brushstroke, in every invention, in every gaze lifted toward the stars, he is there, whispering softly that creativity and rest are not opposites, but companions. The same stillness that fills the night sky once filled his mind, and it fills yours now too. And finally, we enter our final moments together, the dreamer's rest. Now, dear one, let the story settle. You've walked beside Leonardo da Vinci tonight, through sunlit studios and quiet fields, through invention, curiosity, and light. You've watched his mind unfold like wings, rising through centuries, carried by the same wonder that moves through you. Take a deep breath in through your nose, and exhale gently through your mouth. Feel the air, soft and steady, filling you with calm. You too are made of imagination. You too carry light. Every thought, every dream, every small curiosity that flickers inside you is a spark from the same fire that once glowed in Leonardo's heart. When you imagine, you join the same quiet stream of creation that has flowed through all dreamers since time began. Feel your body now, the weight of it, the peace of it, your hands that have created and carried, your chest rising and falling like ocean waves, your mind still but awake, glowing faintly like a candle in the dark. You don't need to solve or fix or reach for anything. You are already part of the great design, exactly as you are. Imagine now that you're standing by Leonardo's window. Outside, the sky is a velvet blue, stars glimmering like thoughts drifting through space. The river nearby whispers softly. You place your hand on the windowsill, feeling the cool stone beneath your fingertips. The air smells faintly of oil paint, parchment, and spring flowers. The candle beside you flickers, and in its light, the pages of Leonardo's notebooks rustle as if breathing. As you look out into the night, you realize that you too are a dreamer of light and line, a thinker, a feeler, a creator of worlds unseen. Every dream you've ever had is part of something vast and kind. The universe itself is sketching through you. Take one more deep breath, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Let everything soften now. Your thoughts can rest. Your imagination can drift. The story continues even in your dreams, where Leonardo's gentle curiosity lives on, not as history, but as light. You are safe. You are infinite. You are a masterpiece in progress. Sleep well, dear dreamer. May your rest be peaceful, your heart open, and your imagination forever free, in the quiet knowing that the dream, like Leonardo's, never truly ends.